Ma'am, this isn't a tour. The floor's closed to anybody not on my roster, and you are not on my roster. So let's walk it back to the lobby. Come on, this way." The woman stopped. She set the handle of a small roller bag upright against her leg, squared herself without hurry, and looked at the Marine the way a person looks at weather. Then she said one word. "Understood." Gunnery Sergeant Cade Hutchins, 34 years old, 7 years on this access point, was already certain the matter was closed. Behind the laminated glass at his back ran the current operations floor of United States Central Command. 4 tiers of consoles dropping toward a wall of screens 2 stories high. The watch director's dais riding above it all. 40 people moving a live fight across 3 continents in low, even voices. It was the most serious room Hutchins had ever guarded, and guarding it had taught him one thing above all others. The people who belonged here did not stand at his vestibule in travel clothes. He reached for the badge clipped to her collar and read it without asking. A temporary visitor, laminate. Visitor, escort required. And under that, in red, status. Pending. There it is, he said, satisfied, letting the badge drop. Pending. That means not yet, ma'am. That means somebody upstairs hasn't cleared you, which means right now, you're a person standing in a doorway she can't go through. He was looking at a badge. She was looking at everything else. In the time it took him to find the red word and feel pleased about it, her eyes had crossed the entire wall of screens. Left to right, top tier to bottom, 8 seconds. Then the 2 exits, then the dais, then back to him. She did it the way other people breathe, without a flicker that would tell him it had happened. The strike cell status block in the upper right of the board held a flat green. She marked it and said nothing. "I get it," Hutchins went on, louder now, pitching it for the 2 watchstanders nearest the glass. "Somebody told you this place is impressive. It is. People come up from the protocol office all the time. They want to look at the famous floor. I understand. But you cannot be in here. The lobby is back that way, and there's coffee, and a very nice young airman who will keep you company until your escort decides to exist." A junior watchstander smirked into his monitor. The woman did not. She glanced once more at the upper right block and spoke, not really to Hutchins, more to the air. "Your west feed is a track, not a blip, and it's stale." Hutchins didn't catch it. The words meant nothing to a man certain he was talking to a tourist, and he turned half away to take a call coming in on his post line, the conversation already over in his mind. 3 consoles in, a man looked up. Command Sergeant Major Desmond Faulkner, 50 years old, 26 of them in the Army, was the senior enlisted advisor on the floor, and he had not survived 26 years by ignoring the back of his own neck. Something at the vestibule was wrong. Not loud wrong. Hutchins was loud, and loud was normal. It was the other thing. The stillness. He watched the woman the way he would watch a reading he didn't trust. Weight centered over both feet, hands quiet at her sides, not fidgeting, not crossed, not reaching for a phone. Chin level. She had just been talked down to in front of 40 strangers, and her pulse, as far as Faulkner could tell from 3 consoles away, had not moved a single beat. He had met exactly 2 people in his career who stood that still in a room this loud. One of them had been a hostage negotiator. The other had flown helicopters in places that did not appear on any map. He looked at her face and began, without deciding to memorize it. Hutchins finished his call and came back to the glass, pleased with the order of his small world. "Still here," he observed. "That's all right. Escort's coming. Probably. Just stand right there and don't touch anything, and we'll get you back where you belong." "I can do that," the woman said. It was the easy agreement that nagged at Faulkner. People who didn't belong argued. People who belonged argued harder. People who simply waited, exactly and patiently, in a room that was treating them like a problem. Those were the ones who already knew how the next hour was going to go and had decided to let it. He glanced at the badge from where he sat. Could not read the name. Could read the red word. Pending. Faulkner turned back to his station, but his eyes stayed on the wall a moment longer than his work required, because the woman had said something about the west feed, and the upper right block was holding a green he had not personally seen refresh all afternoon. They sat her on the vestibule bench until your escort shows, and Hutchins went back to his post line, and the woman did the only thing she had come to that building to do. She read the floor. She did it without seeming to. To anyone watching, she was a tired traveler, resting against a wall, a roller bag at her ankle, hands folded. But her attention moved across the consoles and the big board in a slow, total sweep, the way a pilot reads instruments, not looking at any one thing, taking in all of it, watching for the gauge that lied. In 14 minutes on that bench, she did not look at her phone once. She looked at the wall the way other people looked at a face they loved or feared, and the wall, after a while, gave her the lie. The strike cell readiness block in the upper right showed green. 4 aircraft, 2 crews. Ready alert. A good number, a comforting number, the kind of number a tired commander upstairs liked to see before he went home. The woman watched it for 90 seconds, and in 90 seconds, the small timestamp beneath the block did not roll a single digit. She turned her head an inch toward the nearest watchstander, a young specialist running message traffic, and spoke low and level. That alert status hasn't refreshed in 51 minutes. Either you have the most disciplined crews on this earth, holding a ready posture without a single system handshake for the better part of an hour, or that block is being held green by hand. The specialist opened his mouth, closed it. He looked at the block, then at the woman in the cardigan, and a small, cold feeling started somewhere behind his ribs because he did not know the answer and had never thought to ask the question. From the steps of the dais, Captain Hanna Sorensen heard it, and the floor dropped out of her stomach. Sorensen was 29, the battle captain, the officer who kept the watch honest minute to minute. 11 days earlier, she had logged that exact discrepancy, the held block, the timestamp that would not roll, and she had been told, by a voice that outranked her, to drop it. She had dropped it. She had told herself she was wrong. And now, a woman she had never seen, sitting on the bench they parked nuisances on, had read it off the wall in 90 seconds and named the number to the digit. 51 minutes, Sorensen said, to no one very quietly. Command Sergeant Major Faulkner arrived at the bench. He did not ask the woman who she was. He had decided that question would answer itself, and that the better question was a different one. He stood at an easy parade rest in front of her and asked it. "Ma'am, where'd you learn to read a board from 40 feet? The woman looked up at him, and for the first time that afternoon, something almost like warmth crossed her face. There and gone. "Same place everybody does," she said. Somewhere it mattered. Beside her, the young specialist, reaching across his console, knocked a stylus off the edge. It fell toward the deck. Without looking, without turning her head from Faulkner, the woman's hand came up and took it out of the air, 2 fingers and a thumb, and set it on the bench beside her. The motion was so unremarkable, so unhurried, that the specialist stared at the stylus for a second, as if it had teleported. Faulkner had not missed it. Faulkner had not missed any of it. He had watched a hand that belonged to a shooter or a pilot pluck a falling object out of the air on pure, trained reflex, while its owner held a conversation and never broke eye contact, and he had filed that away beside the board. Read and the stillness and the one stale track line. 3 data points now. 3 was a pattern was a person, and the person sitting on his nuisance bench in a cardigan was nobody he could explain. "That's a fair answer," he said. "It's also not one. But I'll take it for now." "I'd take it too," the woman said, and went back to watching the wall. Faulkner walked back to his own station 3 consoles away, and he did not sit down right away. He stood over his keyboard, and after a moment he pulled up something he had no operational reason to pull up. The refresh log for the upper right strike cell block. The raw handshake record. The list of times the system had, on its own, confirmed the posture was real. He read it once. He read it again to be sure he was reading it right. The last automatic handshake was 53 minutes old. Everything since had been entered by hand. His jaw set, slow and hard, the way a man's does when a small wrong thing turns out to have roots. Somebody on his floor had been holding a number, green, that was not green. Somebody had been lying in the one color that was supposed to mean a crew would come home. And the only person in the building who had said so out loud was a woman in a cardigan that his own access NCO was, at that moment, walking toward with the clear intention of throwing out. Hutchins came back off his post line, saw the visitor mid-sentence with the senior enlisted advisor of the entire floor, and decided the situation had gotten worse on his watch. That was how he read it. The civilian was working. Somebody now. Civilians who got parked at the vestibule were supposed to deflate, check their phones, sigh, give up. This one had somehow drawn the sergeant major into a conversation, and a conversation was the first step to a problem with his name on it. "Okay," he announced, crossing the floor. "Okay, we're done socializing. Sergeant Pell, give me a hand up here." A younger Marine, Sergeant Pell, 26, peeled off the entry post and came over with a wheeled stanchion. "Ma'am, you're going to the lobby. For real this time. I'm not asking a third time." The woman rose when she was told to. She did not argue. She picked up the bag. It should have ended there, clean. But Hutchins had an audience and a grievance, and the two things together made him say the thing the title of the day was built on. "Stop wasting my time, lady. Up, let's go. I've got a floor to run, and you are not part of it." No one touched her. That mattered, and some part of Faulkner clocked that it mattered. Hutchins was loud and certain and wrong, but he was not putting hands on a visitor, the one bright line he would not cross. He used the stanchion and his body and Pell's body to herd her, 3 feet at a time, toward the man-trap. 40 people pretended to work and watched. It was a small public humiliation conducted entirely without contact, and it was, in its way, worse for that, because there was nothing she could point to later and call an assault. There was only a woman being walked out of a room by men who had decided she did not belong in it. She walked when she was walked. Total economy. Not one wasted word, not one wasted motion. Her eyes still moving across the board, even as her feet carried her away from it. She read the upper right block one more time on the way past. Green, frozen, a number being held by a human hand somewhere in that room. And she logged it the way she had logged the position of 2 exits and the name on the dais, filed and kept, because she had learned a long time ago that the things a room does not want you to see are exactly the things worth carrying out the door. A staff officer near the bottom tier watched her go and felt a small private discomfort he could not name, the kind a decent person feels watching a thing that is technically correct and entirely wrong. He looked back at his screen. It was easier than the alternative, and almost everyone, almost always, chooses the thing that is easier than the alternative. That, too, the woman had come to see. Faulkner stepped in. "Gunnery Sergeant, hold up a second." Hutchins waved him off, waved off the command sergeant major of the floor, easy as brushing a fly, certain enough of his own ground that the gesture did not even feel like insubordination to him. "I've got it, Sergeant Major. Some civilian wandered up from protocol. Happens twice a month. I'll have her back in the lobby in 90 seconds. and we can all get back to it." Faulkner stopped. He weighed a public fight with his Access NCO against the cost of the next 90 seconds, and he chose the quieter road, because a public fight would not undo the thing he had just read in the refresh log. He turned, and instead of following the woman toward the door, he walked the other way, toward the watch director's dais and the man who sat on it. At the glass, herded to the threshold of the man-trap, the woman took one last unhurried look back over her shoulder at the wall. She filed 3 things, the way a person files the position of an exit before they need it. The strike cell block, still green, still false. The timestamp, still frozen. And the name engraved on the placard above the dais, where the watch director sat, watching his floor walk a problem out the door. Ashford. She said nothing. The man-trap door cycled, and the heavy magnetic seal took her with a soft pneumatic sigh, and the most serious room she had ever walked into closed itself against her like a hand closing. And here is the thing worth stopping on. The floor had now decided, all 40 of them, that this woman was a problem to be removed. They had herded her, parked her, talked down to her, and walked her out. And in 2 hours, not one single person in that room had asked her name. If watching someone get written off for standing in the wrong clothes makes your jaw tighten the way it should, you already understand what this channel is about. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay with me to the end of this one, because the woman they just walked out of that room came to MacDill 2 days early for a reason. And the reason is about to walk back in through a door no one can wave shut. Colonel Grant Ashford heard about the visitor before Faulkner reached his dais, and it landed in him like a cold stone going down a well. Ashford was 48, the current operations watch director, a careful man who had spent 26 years learning exactly how much truth a system required and how much it would tolerate being shaded. His floor's readiness picture, the picture briefed up the chain every evening, the picture the command saw before it made decisions about where to put aircraft and crews and risk, had been, for some days now, more optimistic than honest. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself the gaps would close before anyone needed them not to be gaps. He told himself a great many things, and every one of them depended on no one reading his board too closely. A civilian had just read his board in 90 seconds and named the lie to the minute. Faulkner came up the dais steps and gave it to him straight, because that was the only way Faulkner gave anything. "Sir, the visitor at the vestibule called your alert block stale. She's right. I pulled the refresh log myself. The last real handshake is 53 minutes old. Everything since his hand entered." Ashford's face did something small and fast. A flinch caught and buried. "Who is she?" "Nobody's checked." "Then she's a security problem," Ashford said, "not a guest." It was the sentence that would end him, and he said it the way a man reaches for a railing in the dark, by instinct to keep from falling. He could not afford a stranger who read boards. He could afford, he thought, a documented procedural matter. So he made the procedural matter. He directed the watch NCO to flag the visitor badge in the system. Unverified. Possible unauthorized presence. He directed a security entry be logged, time-stamped, official. In 90 seconds, he turned a woman he could have simply asked into a documented liability. And he did it because a documented liability could be removed and forgotten, while a question could not. A man protecting a lie always reaches for the rule book first. Out in the vestibule, on the wrong side of the glass, the woman watched the little light on the badge reader beside the door change from amber to red. She understood it instantly and completely, what it was, and why it had happened, and what it told her about the man on the dais she would be working above in 48 hours. "There it is," she said to herself, almost gently. Ashford came down off his dais and out to the glass to take the measure of her, expecting a flustered civilian who would now, with a security flag on her badge, finally deflate. He got stillness. "You've made my floor a lot of noise," he said, through the intercom panel, "for somebody who isn't on it. I don't know who told you that you could stand in my vestibule and editorialize about my readiness picture, but I'll tell you how it works now. You're a documented security matter. That doesn't go away when you leave the building. That follows you." The woman looked at him through the glass for a moment. "It should follow somebody," she said. He did not hear the blade in it. He heard a civilian being difficult. "It'll follow you," he said. She tilted her head, and when she spoke again, it was without heat, almost instructional, and it was the kind of thing that should have stopped him cold. She named the strike cell by its correct alert designation, not the block, the designation, the one printed nowhere a visitor could see. She cited the regulation that governed a held readiness status and the specific, narrow circumstances under which a posture could be carried by hand. And she used, plainly, the exact term for a falsified readiness entry, the term that appears in investigations and not in conversation. For half a second, Ashford registered that a civilian protocol escort does not speak like that. The cardigan and the roller bag said tourist. The mouth said something else entirely, something that knew his world from the inside. Then he buried the thought, because the thought was unbearable, and she needed to be gone. "Escorts en route," he said curtly, and turned and walked back to his dais. He told himself, climbing the 3 steps, that he had done the prudent thing. An unverified civilian on a classified floor was a security matter by any reading of the regulation, and he had treated it as one, and if anyone ever asked, he could point to the entry, and the timestamp and the procedure followed to the letter. That was the comfort a careful man reaches for. What he did not let himself look at, even then, was the order of operations, that the security flag had come after. The woman named his stale board, not before, that he had not become concerned about an unverified presence until that presence proved it could read. A careful man can follow every rule in the book, and still, if you lay his actions end-to-end on a clock, spell out the one thing he was actually protecting. He had put his signature on a timeline. He did not yet know it was the timeline that would hang him. Faulkner had now seen 2 true things, and 2 true things were enough to make him stop trusting the easy story. The first true thing was a board that lied. The second was a watch director who, told that his board lied, had not fixed the board. He had reclassified the person who noticed. Those 2 facts did not point at a wandering civilian. They pointed the other way, up the dais steps, and Faulkner had been a soldier too long to look away from where the facts pointed, just because it was uncomfortable to look there. He stepped off the floor into the corridor outside the JOC, where the hum dropped to nothing behind the heavy door, and he made a call he could not make at his console. He called a sergeant major he trusted in the commander's group, a man 2 doors down from people whose names came with stars. He described the visitor. Not her badge, her height, bearing. The way she sat where she could see both exits, the board rid from 40 feet, the one line about the west feed being a track and not a blip. "Civilian clothes pending badge, reads a wall like it's a threat board," Faulkner said. "Tell me I'm chasing ghosts, and I'll go back inside and forget it." There was a long pause on the line, long enough that Faulkner moved the phone half an inch from his ear to check the call hadn't dropped. Then the friend asked one question back and did not answer Faulkner's. "Desmond, did she catch something nobody else on that floor caught?" Faulkner thought about the refresh log, the 53 minutes, the hand entries. "Yeah," he said. "She did." "Then walk it back," the voice said. "Walk all of it back. Right now. Whatever's been done to her in the last 2 hours, undo it. And don't let your watch director put his name on one more thing. You hearing me?" Who is she? Above your pay grade and mine, the friend said. Until 2 days from now. That's all I can give you. Go fix it, Desmond. The line went quiet. Faulkner stood in the corridor for 1 second. 2, doing the arithmetic of a man who has just realized the small wrong thing has very large roots. And then he went back through the heavy door, onto the floor, to do exactly what he'd been told. He went to the dais, and he kept his voice low, and he tried to give Ashford the off-ramp. Sir, we need to release the badge flag on the visitor and let protocol sort her out properly. Quietly. I'd recommend we do it now. Ashford did not look up from his screen. She embarrassed my floor and questioned my readiness picture in front of 40 people. She leaves under escort, and it's documented, and that's the end of it. I'm not relitigating a security call because she made the sergeant major curious. Sir, that's the end of it. Command, Sergeant Major. Faulkner held there for a moment, jaw tight, and then he stepped back, because there was nothing more he could do from where he stood, and because the only thing worse than what was coming was being the man who saw it coming and couldn't move the colonel 1 inch. Out beyond the glass, on the bench they'd put her back on to wait for an escort. The woman watched Faulkner argue for her through the soundproof wall. She could not hear a word. She did not need to. She read it in his shoulders and the angle of Ashford's refusal, and she understood that the floor had exactly one honest man on it, and she filed his name the way she'd filed everything else. She did not stand up. She did not bang on the glass and announce herself and end it. She could have ended it in a sentence at any point in the last 2 hours, and she had chosen every time not to, because she had not come to MacDill 2 days early to be welcomed. She had come to see how this floor behaved when it believed no one important was watching, and it was showing her, in full, exactly who it was. If you want to know what comes back when a senior enlisted advisor finally types a stranger's description into a closed query, and what a protective detail does the instant a colonel signs the wrong piece of paper, stay with me. Subscribe, so the next story, like this one, comes and finds you. At his console, Faulkner's cursor blinked over a single empty field, marked last name, and across the floor, by the coffee station, 2 men in plain dark suits stood exactly where they had been standing for 20 minutes, holding cups they were not drinking from, watching the bench. The floor goes quiet now. Not the room, the story. For one stretch, the audience gets to know what the floor does not, and it changes everything that is about to happen. The woman on the bench was not a protocol escort. She was not a tourist who had wandered up from the lobby. She was Lieutenant General Tessa Calloway, 53 years old, United States Army, and in 2 days she would raise her right hand and assume duties as the Deputy Commander of United States Central Command, the number 2 officer over the entire floor that had just walked her out the door. But that was not the name that mattered, sitting on that bench. The name that mattered was older. She did not hate Hutchins. She watched him run his post, and she felt something closer to recognition than anger, because she had been Hutchins, 22 years old, certain, guarding a door, sure that the rules were the entire job, and that anyone who didn't fit the roster didn't belong. She looked at the young Marine and saw a soldier who had not yet learned the thing that takes most of a career to learn, that the rules are the floor you stand on, not the ceiling you reach for, and that a man who never asks a name will eventually wave the wrong person through or the wrong person out. She had learned her version of it on a black ridge a long way from Florida. Eastern Afghanistan, 2007. She was 34 years old then, an air mission commander in the 160th, call sign Sable 6, and there was a ground element pinned on a ridgeline with the weather coming down like a lid. 26 minutes she held that orbit. 26 minutes of danger close work, talking a fire team off the rock by voice While her aircraft took hits, she could feel through the airframe. Every second of it a negotiation between the risk of staying and the certainty of what leaving would cost. A crew chief, she would not let the narrator give his name because his name was hers to keep, took shrapnel in those minutes and lived because she held the orbit 9 seconds past what the doctrine allowed and ate the risk herself rather than hand it to the men on the ridge. She had flown home that night with the rotor wash still in her teeth and a hole in the cabin the size of a fist, and she had not slept. And somewhere over the next week, she had pulled the mission logs and walked them backward, beat by beat, to understand how the picture she'd launched on had differed from the fight she'd flown into. The board that morning had said one thing. The ridge had been another. Nobody had lied, exactly. The picture had just been a few hours stale, the way pictures get, and a few hours of stale had nearly cost a fire team and a crew chief everything. She had decided, somewhere in that backward walk, that for the rest of her career, she would treat a stale board as a live round, because that is what it was. They gave her the Distinguished Flying Cross for it later, in a ceremony she had not wanted, and she let them pin it on. And the only thing she took from that night that she actually kept was the lesson underneath it. A readiness board is not paperwork. A readiness board is the difference between a crew that comes home and a crew that does not. When a board says green, somewhere a commander believes it and bets lives on it and goes to sleep. Green has to mean green. She had bled on a ridge for an honest picture of a fight, and she had spent the 19 years since climbing toward rooms where the picture got drawn, and she was not, 2 days short of signing her name above this one, going to be lied to by a timestamp. That was the whole reason she had walked in the door in a cardigan with a roller bag and a pending badge, not to inspect a polished floor scrubbed clean for a visiting general, to see the real one, to see whether this floor's green was honest before she put her name on top of it and started betting crews on what it told her. And there was one more thing the floor did not know, sitting out there managing her like a lost bag. She had not come alone. A woman 2 days from becoming the second most senior officer of a combatant command does not travel alone, not anymore. Not with the threat picture what it was. She was a designated principal, and her protective detail was already inside the building. Plain clothes, patient, holding cups of coffee they were not drinking, watching their principal be walked toward a door by a man who had no idea what he was holding. The trap was closing, and she had set it herself, with the oldest bait there is. She had simply told the truth about a timestamp and waited to see who would try to make the truth go away. The memory snapped shut. She was back on the bench at 1500 hours, a 3-star general in a borrowed-looking cardigan, watching a colonel up on a dais sign an order that would become the worst decision of his life, and she let him. At 1508, Colonel Ashford crossed the bright line, and he crossed it with a signature. The documented security matter was no longer enough for him. As long as the woman sat in his vestibule, she sat near his board, and near his board, she was a question that hadn't been answered. So he converted the question into a removal. He signed an order directing that the unauthorized civilian be physically escorted out of the controlled space, off the floor, out of the building, logged and closed before the evening brief. And he handed it down to the Access NCO to execute. The act was documentable. It gave probable cause. And it was the precise overreach that a protective detail, watching its principal space be controlled by a stranger with a signature, exists to answer. Hutchins took the order, and for the first time all afternoon, he felt a flicker of doubt go through him like cold water. The woman was too calm. The sergeant major was too unhappy. Something about the geometry of the room had stopped feeling like a tourist getting bounced and started feeling like a mistake gathering speed. But he had paper in his hand now, a colonel's signature on it, And paper makes a man brave past the point where his own eyes are telling him to slow down. Sergeant Pell felt it too, and Pell was junior enough to say it. "Gunny," he said, low, falling in behind. "She hasn't done anything. We're walking a lady out for standing still." "We're executing an order, Sergeant," Hutchins said, and heard, even as he said it, how much he was using the word order to drown out the word name. He had not asked her name. 2 hours and a signed page, and he had never once asked the woman her name. The thought arrived, and he pushed it down, because the paper was in his hand, and the paper did not require a name. Across the floor, Faulkner saw the order change hands and understood exactly what it was. Not a removal, a trap springing the wrong way, a colonel handing a Marine the rope to hang the whole floor with. He started moving before he had decided to, threading the consoles, mouth opening to call it off. He was 3 steps too late, and some part of him already knew it, and some older part of him, the part that had read her stillness from 40 feet 2 hours ago, understood that being too late might not matter, because the woman in the cardigan had not spent 2 hours being walked around a room by accident. She had spent 2 hours letting the floor show her exactly who signed what. He crossed to the bench. "Ma'am, I've got an order. You're being escorted off the premises. Don't make it a thing. Just come with me, and we'll keep it civil." She stood the instant he said it, unhurried. She picked up the bag and let him take his position at her right shoulder, exactly where an escort stands, and she did not resist by so much as an ounce. Then she turned her head and gave Cade Hutchins the only warmth she had shown anyone in 2 hours. "You're doing your job," she said. "I'm not going to hold the door against you." He didn't understand why it landed like a warning instead of a thank you. He felt the wrongness of it crawl up the back of his neck, the same place Faulkner's instinct lived. But he had paper, and paper said, "Walk her out." So he reached past her to key the door release and walk a 3-star general off her own operations floor. The woman let herself be turned toward the door. She did not look back at Ashford on his dais. She did not look at the board one last time. She had already taken everything she needed off that wall in the first 90 seconds, and a person who has the picture does not keep checking the picture. She looked, instead, at the young Marine's hand, reaching for the release, and something in her face settled. Not triumph, not anger. The flat, final calm of a pilot who has run the numbers and knows the next 30 seconds before they happen. 2 things moved in the same half-second. Over by the coffee station, one of the men in the plain dark suits set down the cup he had never once drunk from. His name was Bishop Aldridge. He was 41 years old, and he was the lead of Lieutenant General Calloway's protective detail. He lifted his wrist a few inches toward his mouth and said 3 words into his cuff, so quietly that no one within 10 feet heard them. And across the floor, Command Sergeant Major Desmond Faulkner stood up. The colonel had signed his order. Somewhere quieter, in 3 words spoken into a sleeve, a very different order had just been given. Hutchins's fingers found the door release. He pressed it, and every magnetic lock on every door on the operations floor of United States Central Command engaged at once. A single, deep, synchronized sound, like one enormous held breath, sealing 40 people inside a room that had just, in an instant none of them chose, stopped being theirs. The detail sealed the room. There was no formation, no bugle, no called salute, no sea of bodies snapping to attention. There was something quieter and far more total. A security posture, snapping into place across the floor like a circuit closing. The mag locks held. The 2 plainclothes agents from the coffee station were suddenly moving, one to the man-trap, one to the foot of the dais. Unhurried, economical. The same economy the woman on the bench had been showing for 2 hours, and a 3rd agent was at Calloway's right shoulder, in the space Hutchins had been standing in, between the gunnery sergeant and his principal, without anyone quite seeing him arrive. Bishop Aldridge's voice carried across the floor, flat and calm, and absolutely without question in it. The floor is sealed. Nobody touches a console. Nobody enters or leaves. General Calloway's space is secure. The word landed in the room like a dropped tray in a silent chapel. General. Hutchins froze with his hand still near the door release, the order paper going loose between his fingers. He looked at the still woman he had spent 2 hours hurting and parking and talking down to, the woman he had told to stop wasting his time, and the floor of his stomach simply fell away. Every loud, certain thing he had said that afternoon came back to him at once, in her hearing, and he heard them now, the way she must have heard them. "General," he said. It was barely a sound. The order paper slipped the rest of the way out of his fingers and drifted to the deck, and nobody moved to pick it up, and it lay there between his boots like the evidence it was. She did not gloat. That was the thing that undid him more than any shout could have. She did not raise her voice, did not turn on him, did not move fast or sharp or cruel. She simply stood there and was, at last, visibly, exactly what she had been the entire time. The cardigan had not changed. The roller bag had not changed. Only the room's eyes had changed, and through those changed eyes, the stillness that had read like a lost tourist read now as what it was: a general officer, waiting, while lesser people decided how much rope they wanted. Up on the dais, Ashford came apart in stages, and the room watched his face do it. First, confusion. He came down off the dais already talking, certain there had been a clerical mix-up, a misunderstanding he could narrate away. General, there's clearly been the floor protocol requires. Then disbelief, as his eyes found the agents, the locks, the plain hard fact of a protective detail that did not assemble for protocol escorts. Then recognition, arriving all at once and terribly. The pending badge, the held block, the woman who had read his lie off the wall in 90 seconds and named the falsified entry term to his face, was the incoming deputy commander of his command. And then horror, pure and quiet, as he understood that he had not merely been rude to her. He had flagged her badge. He had signed an order. Twice in his own hand, in the system, he had documented himself. "General Calloway," he said, "I wasn't. The floor protocol, I didn't—" "You documented all of it, Colonel," Calloway said. Quiet. Even. "So did I." And then the part the worn version of this story always gets wrong. There was no wall of salutes. The room did not erupt. Instead, one man crossed the floor, Command Sergeant Major Desmond Faulkner, the one honest man, the one who had argued for a stranger and lost. And he stopped at the correct distance, and he rendered a single salute. One man, not the room, and he said the only thing that needed saying. "Ma'am, the board's been frozen the second the door's locked. Whatever's on it is still on it. Nothing's been touched." Lieutenant General Calloway returned his salute, the only one rendered, the only one needed. And then she turned away from all of them, away from the apologizing colonel and the stricken gunnery sergeant and the 40 people who had watched her be walked out, and she looked at the wall of screens. The strike cell block still glowed its handheld green, frozen now by lock and by law, exactly as dishonest as it had been 90 minutes earlier. Preserved. Caught. She walked onto the floor she had been waved off of, the roller bag left behind at the bench, and she crossed to stand beneath the upper right block, and she said 4 words to the frozen room. "Now show me everything." Up on the dais, Colonel Grant Ashford closed his eyes. The frozen board did the work, and it did it fast, precisely because nothing on it could be changed. This is the part where, in a lesser version, the handcuffs come out. They didn't come out. What happened instead was quieter, and for the man at the center of it, far heavier. With the floor sealed and every log preserved, the audit took less than an hour and required almost no drama at all. The held timestamp, the overwrite record on the alert block, hand entries stacked over a system that had stopped confirming the posture 53 minutes before a stranger named the number. And Ashford's own security flag on the visitor badge, time-stamped. There it was, in the record, for anyone to read. After the stale board complaint, not before. A man's signature on the exact clock that proved what he'd been protecting. Lieutenant General Calloway relieved him of his duties as watch director on her own authority, standing on the floor in front of the people who had watched him run it. She did not have him arrested. She did not have him marched out between agents while the room watched. She directed an administrative review and a reassignment, and she let him gather his own things. And the narrator will tell you plainly why, because it is the whole point of who she is. She did not arrest him. She did something he would feel a great deal longer. She took the floor away from him, and she made him stand there and watch it begin to run honestly without him. Then she found the 11-day-old log. Captain Hanna Sorensen was standing very straight by the dais steps, certain that proximity to the disaster would cost her too. Calloway pulled the discrepancy record up on the nearest screen. The flag Sorensen had logged 11 days earlier, the held block, and stacked right on top of it, the override from a voice that had outranked her and told her to drop it. "You flagged this," Calloway said, 11 days ago, and they sat on you." "Yes, ma'am." "Not anymore." Calloway looked at her for a moment longer. "You kept the watch honest when it cost you to do it and bought you nothing. That's the only qualification for the job that actually matters. You and I are going to talk about where you go next." And the battle captain, who had been overruled and silenced, was, in the space of one sentence, moved onto a path that led up. Here is where I'll ask you for the one thing this story is worth. A floor full of people wrote a woman off because she stood there in the wrong clothes. And that floor runs honest tonight, because she refused to be lied to by a number on a wall. If that landed for you, do the thing the floor wouldn't do for 2 hours. Say her name in the comments. And subscribe to Honor Tales, so the next story, like this one, comes and finds you. That left the gunnery sergeant. Cade Hutchins stood at rigid, miserable attention by the man-trap, paper still in his hand, certain his career had ended somewhere around the words, "Stop wasting my time." He had walked the second in command of a combatant command toward a door. He waited to be destroyed. Calloway crossed to him and stopped, and she did not destroy him. "You enforced your access roster against someone who wasn't on it," she said. "That part is the job, gunnery sergeant. That part you did right." She let that sit a second. "You did it loud, and you did it without once, in 2 hours, asking me my name. That's the part we're going to fix, you and me, because I don't want the man who guards my door to be the easiest one in the building to embarrass. I want him to be the hardest one to fool." She nodded once toward his post. "You're staying on my floor. Go stand your watch." Hutchins's throat worked. "Yes, ma'am." It was the only thing he had said all afternoon that he meant all the way down. By 1840, the floor had emptied to the night watch. Lieutenant General Calloway stood alone beneath the wall of screens, in front of the block that read, "Honest Amber." Now, where it had glowed false green, a woman who in 2 days would sign her name as Deputy Commander, looking at a board she already tonight owned. No memorial, no coded message on a quiet phone, no far-off theater calling her name, just a general and a board, and the work that had always been the only work. She pulled the alert block up one more time and watched the timestamp at the bottom, and she waited, and it rolled, actually rolled. A real handshake, the system confirming on its own that what the wall said was true. She let herself feel it for exactly 1 second. Then she went back to work. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.